Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain, Randy Wright speaking. And, as always, I'm joined on our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Grapenden. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while Jeremy and I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before we may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, Ted Cruz said that he will support Donald Trump. That is one of the most groundbreaking decisions that have been made during this 2016 presidential election cycle. And of course, many will feel that this is a great betrayal of the position that Cruz had taken throughout the primary process leading up to this general election cycle. And it's also the last thing that any staunch supporter of his throughout the primary process wants to hear. Nevertheless, it's a choice he made. Something we need to keep in mind, however, is that he didn't say that we had to vote for Trump. That means that we are still free to vote our conscience. Recall that during his address to the entire Republican National Convention there in Cleveland, Ohio, back in July, Cruz said that it was very important that we be able to vote our conscience, to be able to vote the way that we feel is necessary and is in our best interest. But it's something for him that he felt was necessary. And keep in mind that he's having to keep other things in consideration as well. And what I'm doing here is I'm not trying to be an apologist for Cruz, because as we have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's not that we are going to tell you how to vote. We're not going to tell you how you should exercise your fundamental and inalienable right that was given to you or endowed to you by your creator, the God of nature himself. That's not our position. It's not anyone's position to tell you how to exercise that. But I am trying to come at this from a pragmatic approach in which Cruz would approach it as well, because we've always known him to be one that applies the political strategy that comes to mind. And I'm not saying that even to say that he's being an opportunistic politician. I think he literally struggled with this. That's why it took this long to make that decision. Is it a decision that I agree with? Not necessarily, because I have looked over Trump's history, just as Jeremy has, just as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, has, and we do not find him acceptable. And we cannot find any way to reconcile Trump with our constitutional composition as standing. Nevertheless, that does not mean that someone cannot, in their own individual capacity, try and find a way that works. It just doesn't mean that we will necessarily agree with it. And I think it's important that we do stress at this juncture that we do have the ability to think for ourselves, that we do have the ability to act for ourselves. And that's what makes this country great. As Jeremy has said on a previous episode of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's that if we all agreed all the time, it would be very boring. Plus, the only time you're ever going to agree with a candidate 100% of the time is if you are that candidate and, in fact, you are operating in full self-interest. So we do have to keep those things in mind, because if we don't, then we're allowing these other penultimate concerns to come in. Now, if you, of your own accord, cannot ever forgive Cruz for this, that's your own prerogative. I'm not going to tell you how to do that or how to think. What we're trying to do here is just give a little bit of an insight as to how we feel or how we're thinking in connection with all of this, because that is what is important to try and get across, so that we can at least let you know where we're coming from. I don't want to be dishonest with you. In fact, the whole purpose here is for us to reach for the truth. That's what we've always been dedicated to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, and I think that we have to stay cognizant with that and abreast of that.
You know, Randy, you and I talked a couple of days ago about this, And immediately we started brainstorming as to what the intentions of behind Cruz's actions or decision to vote for Trump. And before I jump into my little spiel about this or what I'm thinking is going on, just strategizing or trying to be prophetic about this, which a lot of people do. You see all these individuals like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. They're always trying to analyze, the purpose of somebody's actions. But I just want to say this first. As you stated, we're not here to tell anybody how to vote or who to vote for. If we did that, everything that we've said on any topic would have been a bald-faced lie, because it goes completely against the grain of what we're all about. We're not here to disparage anybody exercising their rights for whatever reason. In fact, we're here to encourage them to do so. If these individuals who have supported Trump before and then stopped supporting him because they realized what he was all about, but now they're going back to vote for him, or individuals who supported Cruz and say, well, I have nothing to do with Cruz because he's voting for Trump. I'm not going to vote for Trump. I'm not voting for evil, period. Whatever, any decision anybody makes, it's their decision. It's their right. And we're going to defend that right at all costs. It doesn't matter. Now, with that being said, here's me being analytical about this. I think this is somewhat of a power play on Cruz's part. Again, you mentioned we don't want to delve into him being a strategist or anything, but I really want to touch on this because to me, it makes perfect sense for him to do this because of the threats of rinse and repeatus. He kind of has to toe the line, just like every other politician. This is a pay-to-play type thing, and if you don't pay, not just monetary wise, but if you don't pay with whatever they want you to pay with, even if it's your soul, you're not allowed to play. And Cruz has been backed into a corner, as has many other politicians. I think he's doing this as a somewhat to go along to get along type thing at this point in juncture to set himself up later on down the road, because all he has to do is say, look, all of you individuals that supported Trump that bailed on me, I voted for Trump, and this is what happened. He ended up losing anyways, which he probably will still lose against Hillary regardless of how many people vote for him. It's just the way the Fabians operate. But this is a way of him being able to vote his conscience, exhibiting and going after and exhausting all remedies of trying to preserve this republic. He's tried to do the magnanimous thing. He's stood steadfast on the Constitution. That still didn't resonate with people, even coming from Cruz. So now he's looking at this saying, well, you know what? I'm going to, as people would say, cave, which I don't think he's caving in any way. I'm going to vote for Trump, and just so I can show people, look, I've done this, and this. I've exhausted all remedies, and none of those things worked not because of the candidate, but because of the blind rage and fury that has consumed the individuals and tarnished their logic and their thinking process.
Right. And, all of this said, it doesn't make it any less painful to see this.
No.
Because we all held out that he would be the candidate that would always stand for principle. And it's not necessarily even saying that he's going against principle or that he is acting in a way that is contrary to principle, but it's not necessarily a decision we agree with. That being said, Jeremy, a mutual acquaintance of ours, whom we no longer speak with, had said that this was a war. They being the Lion Branch Trumpidians, they are the ones that want to turn this into a war. They are the ones that want to make this a painful, bloody, drawn-out affair. And I don't really think they understand just what sort of fire they're playing with. But, it doesn't matter how they treat it. It doesn't coincide with what our electoral process is about. We are not about forming wars. We're not about going out and creating these sorts of divisive environments. We're not about going out and just fighting to fight for fighting's sake. But I think what we have witnessed here is the most heated, contentious, and ugly primary process in history. Trump was willing and is willing to attack those who are within his own party much harder and with much more vigor and zeal than he is willing to go after his supposed opponent. We've mentioned that this coincides with his long, well-established history of supporting Fabians throughout his lifetime. That's just who he is. It's who he's always been, and I don't see that changing at any time in the foreseeable future. But all of this would suggest, along with his other positions and statements throughout the campaign process, that he hasn't changed at all. We've warned that he wouldn't change, and he's just living up to that. He is not changing. He has no reason to want to even try and change. And I think that is what makes Cruz's decision to vote for Trump in the general election all the more difficult to swallow. How could such a staunch defender of the Constitution be willing to vote for somebody who has, through his own admission, never once found any intrinsic or inherent value in the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution? Again, I think that there is a strategic reason for this, as you had mentioned, Jeremy, because if you recall, he was recently doing his utmost to block the Obama regime's efforts to give away America's control over the registering of internet domains through that group called ICANN. But the Senate leadership blocked this stance by Cruz, giving credence to the Lion Branch Trumpidians' claim that everyone in the Senate hates him. No, it's not everyone. It's the sellouts like Mitch McConnell, like in the House of Representatives, Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House.
Sure. Going on with the analytics of this, let's look at the flip side. A lot of people are saying that Cruz's political career is done because he supported Trump. Well, the individuals that are saying that, and I understand where they're coming from. They feel.
I do too. In fact, one of them is our Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward.
Yes, they feel betrayed, but there's always times in life, no matter who you are, you're going to have to do things that you normally wouldn't do or you don't ever want to do, and said that you will never have to do. There's always times, there's always one point in somebody's life where that has to come down to it. And I think this may have been one of those points in times for Ted Cruz. Now, again, I don't like his decision to vote for Trump, but it's not my decision to like or dislike. It's his vote. And again, we're not here to disparage anybody. If he wants to vote for Trump, that's his right. He has the right to do that. And anybody that wants to disparage that, while saying that they're supportive of the Constitution, I can't honestly believe you're supportive of the Constitution if you want to disparage somebody's right to vote, no matter who they want to vote for. Again, it's their right. It's fundamental principle of the Constitution. But here's the thing. If he doesn't do this, if he didn't acquiesce to this, what kind of pressures would be placed on him? What kind of political career would he have if he didn't do something that he didn't want to do? Okay, how many times? See, a lot of people aren't examining that. They're saying his political career is over. I think this is just staving it off and setting himself up to where he is going to be viable for us for 2018 and again in 2020. If he was to just say, you know what, I'm not voting for Trump, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, as much headway as he had and as many people as he had supporting him, if he was to stay with that, this, I think, is a way for him and all conservative values to stay intact instead of being completely destroyed like Donaldo Caesar Trumpolini wants. Remember, he said this is not the conservative party, it's the Republican Party. There's no place for conservatives. I think this is Cruz digging his heels in and saying, I'm not going to go quietly into the night. Yes,
Right.
okay, I'm going
Right.
to vote for you, but I'm not going to do it to show support for you. I'm not going to do it because I support you. I'm going to vote for you so that I can preserve what the very last remnants of conservative constitutional principles that are still vibrant in our republic. And I'm not
Right.
going to allow you to destroy that. I think that's
Right.
what his decision.
And remember that Rince and Repeatus had gone before the cameras of the mainstream media to boldly proclaim that the RNC would punish anybody who refused to support the gutless opposition party or GOP nominee. In other words, he was firing a direct shot at the Texas senator.
Mhm.
That doesn't make the decision Cruz made any easier to swallow, but it does make it understandable. Folks, again, we're never going to tell you how to think about a candidate or how you should vote your conscience. The reason for this is we are not in the place to tell you to exercise or how to exercise your rights, just as no one is in the place to dictate how we shall exercise our rights. The other important thing to stress here is that you might not agree with Jeremy or my assessment on this situation. That's perfectly fine too. We have to be able to think for ourselves. That's one of the greatest things about living in a free, representative republic like the United States. If we were to agree on everything, just imagine how boring the world would be. That said, I honestly don't believe, looking at this from a political standpoint, that Cruz was left with much of a choice here. Strategically speaking, he wasn't. With the way that the GOP is acting right now, I think it placed him in a bit of a position of damned if you do, damned if you don't, Jeremy, as you had mentioned.
Sure.
Still, I know that the Constitution and that many decent constitutionalists would say that this is in direct opposition to everything that we hold. I think my perspective may be a bit different, having had Cruz as a senator since 2012. The man's career speaks for itself. He has defended the Constitution at every step of the way, whether it was a senator for the state of Texas or Solicitor General for the same. But I know that the counter argument to this is that being 1% against the Constitution makes one as good as an enemy to the Constitution. Yes, I can understand that, but I'm not so sure that Cruz meant this as a stance against the Constitution. Rather, I believe he sees this as a personal choice he has made, but tells us to make whatever choice agrees with our conscience all the way up and down the ticket. Recall that this, along with support for the Constitution, was what drew the loudest boos during his address to the Republican National Convention back in July. That is something that still floors me, that there is enough people within the party to boo the Constitution. To my mind, this makes it a greater problem than keeping score with one blemish on an otherwise spotless record of a particular politician.
Well, and that's part of the problem is again, situations like this come up, and these standards are applied because the ability for people to think for themselves has gone by the wayside. Now we know individuals that have always been able to think for themselves, will always continue to think for themselves. We're not including those individuals into this. We're looking at this as a generalization as a whole with the American people and the voting electorate. It's become the norm to where no matter how much right you do, you have one blemish, you're damned for all eternity. And that seems to be the point that's being driven on against Ted Cruz here with his choice to vote for Trump. Now, again, people would hear that statement right there and say, well, obviously, you're supportive of Trump. No, absolutely not. We're not defending Trump. We're not defending Trump in any way, shape, or form. To us, he's nothing more than Hitler with a spray-on tan and a very bad, lopsided, bleached skunk pelt sitting on his head. Okay? It's just, we have no admiration for Trump whatsoever. None. But again, individuals, no matter what their walk of life, no matter what career they're in, they will always be faced with a decision that they have to make. And it's going to put them in a catch-22. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't. See, this is the true lesser of two evils. People want to talk about the lesser of two evils. Okay, let's apply it to Ted Cruz's decision. Is it evil to not support the presidential candidate? Some would say yes. Is it evil to vote for him? Well, some would say yes. And in certain circumstances, the individuals that are angry at Cruz for doing this, they're applying that standard. They're saying, well, now he supports evil. No, that's not what it means. Just because he's voting for Donald Trump doesn't necessarily mean he supports him. He may be looking.
Jeremy, he came out the day after he made this announcement and said, when asked if Trump was fit to be president of the United States, he said unequivocally no.
But he's faced with, because of this whole lesser of two evils thing, this has been blown way out of proportion and exacerbated that people seem to think that they only have one of two choices. And if you don't fall in lockstep with that, you're doomed as a politician. So I'm thinking he did this he conceded a little to gain a lot more in the end run. Sometimes we have to do that. You know, as you mentioned before, this is a war. Well, the Trumpidians wanted a war. This, I think, is just a way of Cruz acknowledging that and actually fighting this war. He's conceding a little to the enemy so that he can gain more ground in the end. We've seen people do that. Patton did that.
Of course. Patton, Douglas MacArthur.
And MacArthur, even Rommel. You know, people say, well, Rommel was a Nazi. Yes, he was, but he was a brilliant war strategist.
In fact, remember, he had to commit suicide because he was going to kill Hitler.
Yes. So the whole thing is, I mean, people say, well, he's still a Nazi. The man wrote a book on how to win battles, and that book was used by Patton for training purposes.
Yes, it was. In fact, Jeremy, I think it's safe to say that the United States is in a battle for its soul. The seeds of division have made this election cycle one of the most bizarre that I've ever encountered during my brief lifetime. We've both lost friendships that we've had for years over this. And it's troubling to think that this is all due to the twisted machinations of the man who somehow managed to clinch the nomination for the gutless opposition party, or GOP. But that is what we're facing. And I think we're going to have to be cautious in our approach moving forward, or else we risk losing the constitutional movement. I think we have to be patient about our approach. And while I don't necessarily agree with the decision Cruz reached to support Trump in the general election, I think it's important that he remain in the Senate. It all reminds me of an old quote. Even though the United States isn't a democracy, I believe this quote still applies. It's from Alexander Fraser Tittle. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. These nations have progressed through this sequence from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, from dependence back into bondage. And I think we do see this cycle, and it's part of the human condition. But that being said, I believe that we can break the cycle by promoting the Constitution above all else. That's why we say it's the key here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Cruz, in my opinion, may have made a mistake by announcing who he'd vote for in the general election. But again, I think the GOP was essentially forcing his hand here. He is concerned for the Constitution and doesn't think that we can get a third party going in the interim, and this was his best option. If that means you can't support him, I understand. I still believe he can do some good, especially in the Senate. And as he's my senator, that's a choice I'm going to have to make in 2018. That's the problem with this electoral process. It has pushed all of us to the edges. It's pitted us against one another without good seeming to come out of it. Still, the most important thing is that we make decisions for ourselves and are not forced into them.
Well, this leads right into the next point I was going to make. Again, this decision is Cruz's. We may think it's a mistake. Many people think it's a mistake for him to vote for Trump. But it's not our mistake to make because it's not our choice. It's not our vote. It's his. He's the one who has to answer for this. Now, who are we or anybody else to cast disparagement on an individual for exercising their right to vote? Who are we to judge them for exercising their right to vote? We don't have that authority. It is not granted to us within our enumerated rights within the Constitution, so therefore we don't have the right to do it. That's how that works. And it points out the fact that the way our society and our government politique has become is that it seems that when one individual makes a choice and those that would support that individual or don't support that individual automatically cast the dispersion or the generalization that everybody has to go along with what they think. Again,
yeah, it's kind of that collectivist group thing.
It's that collectivist group think mentality that is eroding away and sweeping away and basically turning the whole objective of being able to think freely for yourself like scattering ashes to the wind. Mm-hmm. We have to stop that. If Cruz made this decision and if it becomes a mistake, it's his mistake that he's made. It doesn't fall on those that still support Cruz for senator for 2018 or potentially a White House run in 2020. It doesn't have. See, I'm still going to support Cruz because I understand, and I've been put in positions where I've had to do things that go against my better judgment, and I know they were wrong to do, but I had to do them. I had to conform to them in order to gain more ground in the end run. That's how things work. That's the way life has been since it's been put here on this earth.
Right. It's part of being pragmatic. It's part of being pragmatic. You have to be pragmatic about things. And that's part of the problem that we've encountered in election cycle after successive election cycle. It's that we have just allowed everything of the here and now to take control of everything. And so we lose this overarching picture. Imagine, if you will, during the time of the American War of Independence, if we had just done everything in the here and now. Can you imagine what would have happened the first time Washington ran into trouble? And in fact, there were those who did think in the here and now at that time. Think to the actions of Benedict Arnold during the Revolutionary War. He had lost sight of the overarching importance of independence. He had grown very concerned about his own earthly condition, his own materialistic wealth. And that had played against him. It had turned him against the man who had been his greatest supporter, his greatest acolyte during the entire American War of Independence, that being General George Washington. And because of that, he was willing to go out and betray his principles. And when he did that, he didn't win any favors or curry any favors in the British Army. And he had basically turned away from the cause of independence and liberty. In fact, the whole term for becoming a traitor, which had always been turning coat, after Benedict Arnold had surrendered West Point to the British, it became known as turning Arnold. It meant that you were giving up everything and becoming like Benedict Arnold, essentially turning from a hero to a traitor. And you can't afford that, because when that plays out, it destroys your reputation, and it whittles down the importance of what you're trying to stand for and represent. And you see, that's the important thing that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are trying to achieve. We're trying to empower you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, to be able to stand up for yourselves, to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, because through that, you're able to parse through some of these painful things. And there will always be painful things. That's a natural aspect of life. It's not something that we can get around. It's not something we can ignore. It's something that we have to fully understand is part of the nature of politics and the nature of everything that we are facing.
You know, it also comes down to, again, as I pointed, it's almost like this is being thrown into the court of public opinion, just with like anything else. A lot of people, I've seen numerous people say that Ted Cruz is a traitor. They're putting that moniker and that label on him because he makes one decision to cast a vote for Trump. Now, a lot of people say, well, you know, his reasons don't wash with me, and this it really truly doesn't matter, because the simple fact is, again, it's his vote.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what people need to do is put themselves in his shoes and pretend that they're running for office or have run for office and will be seeking their current position that they hold now as senator or whatever, and maybe even a future presidential run. If your supporters turn on you because of one decision you make, what would it have been like if those individuals that supported George Washington would have abandoned him when he made that decision, when he knew something wasn't right with Benedict Arnold, when he knew something wasn't right with him, and he made the decision to not have him arrested at that point in time? He didn't jump the gun. He wanted to see how this played out. Now it's not even that. People are jumping the gun, automatically casting dispersions and saying that Cruz is a traitor. He's this, he's that. He's going to, do whatever. Again, the court of public opinion has no authority or any weight in saying in any of this. Why? Because the court of public opinion does not operate within the confines of the United States Constitution.
Well, Jeremy, historically speaking, there was that aspect of those who questioned Washington's judgment from the beginning. One of them was General Gates. Recall that General Gates, during the whole Southern campaign, had this idea of how it was to be run. But he was known as Granny Gates because he was timid. He wasn't willing to take risks. He thought that Washington just took far too many risks. And then when he engaged in that, he was the first to run away after he had encountered the British under General Lord Cornwallis and had suffered a major defeat. He was the first. He was fastest back. In fact, Alexander Hamilton laughed at him and said that, he made this distance, I believe it was 230 miles in a day and a half, and that speaks volumes about a man in his age and condition.
Yeah. So going after an individual or labeling them because they make a decision, you can't just jump to conclusions on this. I want to see how this plays out, and I'm thinking, Randy, I'm really thinking. I've given this a lot of thought. Again, I think this is somewhat of a small power play on Cruz's part, not for his own personal gain for 2018 or 2020, but more so
for us.
But for us, for the Republic. Right. It's right. Again, I think it's his way of digging his heels in, and things are not always what they seem. In a way, I'm thinking of this as kind of a infiltration tactics, so to speak. Okay, I'm going to vote for Trump, and that way, now all the Trumpidians are going to welcome Ted with open arms, but some of them aren't, but enough of them will. So yeah, we converted another one. He actually finally saw the light, blah, blah, blah. And then when this election plays out like we think it's going to play out, that being Trump losing, all Cruz has to say is, look, I've done this. I've gone this route. I've done this. I've exhausted all of these remedies. I even voted for the individual that you guys hold in such high regard and esteem,
Right.
and it still didn't matter because he was unfit. And this will give him the ammunition and the wherewithal and the power that he needs to show people, look, this is what happens when you abandon your principles. This is what happens when you don't vote your conscience. This is what happens when you fail to realize the distinction that evil equals evil, no matter how bigly or sickly it might be.
Right. In fact, Jeremy, Eric Erickson over at the Resurgence had said that he believed that this was a weak move on Cruz's part. Again, I'm not entirely sure I disagree, but I do happen to see it a bit differently. I think Cruz is approaching this from a long-term strategy point of view. Think of it this way. If Trump falls in flames, as we think he will, they are automatically going to seek a scapegoat for this. And that's what I think you were alluding to.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that Trump has a history of making a false perception of people stick, such as how he called El Jefe Jeb Bush as low energy.
Yeah.
The pledge thing that even Trump failed to follow and said that he would be the first to break it, and which Cruz correctly pointed out that stance by Trump invalidated it, was still being utilized and is still being utilized as a weapon against the Texas senator. Remember that in politics, a false perception can mean more and be more powerful than reality or truth. You can go out and explain something time and time again, but the only way that you're going to make an impact on the people is when you're able to touch logic and emotion. That's why, in The Art of Rhetoric, Aristotle said to appeal to both logic and emotion, but not to do so in a manipulative fashion or to manipulate people. Trump has a well-established track record of reaching out to people's emotion, but disregarding the logical side or aspect of it. That's why he never expounds upon positions. He just says the magic buzzwords. And you know, Jeremy, I know we have hit on that over and over again. He's even admitted that to the media on numerous occasions. Remember that he said that you can bend the truth in the art of the deal. And recall that there are so many of the Lion Branch Trumpidians who cower there in the Trumpidian tabernacle and try and say that, well, you know, it's unfair to make comparisons of Donaldov to Adolf Hitler because Hitler wrote the, Mein Kampf, My Struggle or My Battle, and Trump wrote The Art of the Deal, How to Get Rich, except that in The Art of the Deal, Trump reiterated, emphasizing time and time again that you bend the truth or you discard the truth if the truth stands in opposition of your overarching goals. That's exactly what the fascists do. That's exactly what any type of socialist or fascistic system of government does. And it goes back to what Tittle said. With Trump, you see abundance. And with abundance, you go to complacency. And from complacency, you go to dictatorship. Trump is going to try and maintain his complacency. He's going to try and maintain the power that he has illicitly amassed for himself at the expense of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And in so doing, he's going to push us towards dictatorship because in his mind and in his heart of hearts, he thinks literally that he knows better than any and all of us with respect to how things are to work in the country and how to accomplish things. But nothing could be further from the truth because what he's doing is further distancing, divorcing, and dividing ourselves from the foundational tenets that are found in the clear and concise language within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And again, folks, you're either for the Constitution or you're against it. And with either of the two mainstay political parties and the candidates for those respective parties, neither one of them is standing up for the Constitution. Neither one of them is saying that the Constitution is what matters or that that is what they swear their unyielding loyalty, obedience, and adherence to and allegiance to. And I think that's the major problem that we have with either one of them.
You know, I think I need to provide an example to solidify my points about Cruz's decision to vote for Trump. You know, a lot of people would say, well, he's anti-Constitution now. He's abandoned this because he's voting for Trump, and Trump doesn't support or doesn't even know the Constitution. Here's an example. Convicted felons, as per the Supreme Court ruling of 1968, I believe, Haynes v. U.S., the Supreme Court ruling says that convicted felons are not obligated to register firearms because it is a violation of their Fifth Amendment self-incrimination. Because if they're convicted felons, they register they're admitting to owning firearms, which they're not legally allowed to do, but it's an admission of guilt. Okay? Right. I support that decision. Does that mean that I want convicted felons to have firearms that don't need to have firearms? Absolutely not. Does that mean that I'm anti-constitutional? Absolutely not. Okay, this is a point because a lot of people would say, well, they're convicted of a felony. They can't, by law, they can't own firearms. They shouldn't even be able to own them. If they have them, they should have to register them like everybody else. I'm sorry, but that's in violation of the Constitution because that Supreme Court ruling, I believe it was in the Warren Court.
Right, which is surprising. The Warren Court had two good decisions. One was Miranda v. Arizona.
Yes.
And that one.
Yes. And so does that mean that because I agree with the court's ruling, even though the court was leftist as all get out in that era, does that mean that I'm anti-constitutional? No. Does it mean that Ted Cruz is anti-constitutional because he casts the vote, exercises his right to cast the vote for somebody that somebody else doesn't like or have any aspirations of voting for? Does that make him anti-constitutional? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. People would make the argument, well, he's still supporting evil. Okay? Well, guess what? Individuals by themselves cannot vanquish evil. All they can do is operate within the best of their God-given abilities to do the right thing. And if voting for Trump, in Cruz's mind, is the right thing to do for preservation of the Republic, preservation of the Constitution, again, I'm going to point back to the flip side of this. If he ignores the threats of rinse and repeatus and does not vote for Trump, what is his political clout and weight going to be at that point in time? What's going to befall him in his political career? Is rinse and repeatus going to make true on his threats?
Well, I don't think that's he already has.
Yeah, I don't think that's the chance that Cruz wants to take.
That Cruz was trying to say that you can't, or that he was trying to fight that taking away of the internet and registering of the domains with ICANN.
Yeah.
That was a very powerful position, and in fact, it was kind of staggering that Trump even came out and supported that, paying lip service to it. I think that was some of Trump's Spocks there trying to figure out, or some of his policy wonks, the ones that didn't quit after he refused to pay them, were trying to say this is a good position.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn and all of the rest of the détente wing of the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP, went out of their way to ensure that didn't get included in the bill. Why? Just because of their personal animosity towards Cruz. In fact, they're going out of their way to try and say that they're going to do whatever they can to unseat Cruz in this 2018 election. They're going to try and primary him out. And I think that Cruz realizes that whatever candidate they try and foist or cram down the throats of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours is not going to be in the best interest of the American people. It's not going to be advocating our position. It's not going to be moving us in a direction that we need to be. And so, in a way, he's falling on a political sword. I don't think he's committing political suicide, per se, although he is going to have to re-earn a lot of that trust. I think that this is trying to stand up for the constituents, which is what he has always done ever since he assumed the mantle of his publicly elected office here in the state of Texas. And that means making tough decisions. Because when you stop and think about it, when you are serving in a representative capacity, you're not there in your own capacity. You're there to represent the people. That's part of the beauty of a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic like that of these United States of America. But I think that so many people get caught up in the here and now that they lose sight of that. that overarching picture. And again, what is the thing that unifies us both as a nation and as a people? What is the only thing that we are called to swear allegiance to? It is our United States Constitution. Nothing less, nothing more.
And again, I think this is indicative of people having to come to the realization and begin to remember. And see, you said this is putting us in a place that they try to primary Cruz out, that they're going to try and do this. All that's doing is laying the groundwork and the foundation for complacency. That's what they're wanting to do. Of course, that's what the detente wing always looks for. They want people to be complacent. They want that makes them no different than the Fabians. Because if you have complacent individuals that you can lord over, and that you can supposedly, quote unquote, represent, that means that you're going to do things in such a way to where it's beneficial for them at first perception, but in the end run, in the long term, it's doing nothing more but breeding those individuals out, removing free thinking reality for these individuals, and instilling this drone sense, this mindless robotic sense of being lockstep. Now,
it's all part of that collective.
Sure.
It's all part of collective thinking.
And again, this is a decision. Cruz made this choice. Cruz himself has to answer for this. Nobody else can answer for him. Nobody else has any authority to answer for him, offer up any kind of validity for this. Even though that may seem what we're trying to do, I've said all the things that I've said to bring it up to this point, that he made that decision. And again, we are not in the business, so to speak, of telling people how to vote or who to support. It's not our purview to do it. It's not our authority. This is what Cruz was talking about when he said, vote your conscience. All we're trying to do, Randy, for our listeners and for the greater good, the greater sum of all of our parts of this republic, is to get people to realize what their conscience is. Mm-hmm. To show them that their conscience is what empowers them with the principles of the Constitution. That's all we're trying to do. And when we have to point out things like this, and what seems, see, things are not always as they seem. We say and do things in order to build upon something, to bring it to another point that brings the whole puzzle together. And I think that's what Cruz is doing with this decision to vote.
Right. So, and in fact, I think what we have to keep in mind here is that there, as you were alluding to, may be other reasons that he did this. I'm not merely saying this to be an apologist for Cruz. I will call him out on this decision. I think it is one that has hurt his credibility, and it's going to make it more difficult for him to earn back that respect that he's lost with quite a few of his supporters. But I'm also not attempting to offset the feelings people have with respect to this or to belittle them. Rather, I'm merely, as you are as well, Jeremy, attempting to provide the insights I'm having with respect to this entire situation. I'm going to stress this again, that I personally cannot support Donald Trump. He doesn't fit my values whatsoever. And yes, I'm disappointed that Cruz decided that this was the choice that he had to make. But unlike Cruz, I'm not having to run for office. I don't have those sorts of considerations to make. I think he's trying to preserve the conservative cause to the best of his ability. While this may not be the best way to do that, it's the best to his mind. He still came out and proclaimed that he didn't think Trump was fit for the highest office in the land. And again, I think that speaks volumes about just how much he struggled with making this decision. I don't think this was an easy decision for him to make. Cecil Steinmetz, his driver during the primary process and who just adores his family, says that he struggled with this and also disagrees with it. And I think that I have very similar positions with respect to that. We understand how he struggled with it. We understand that he struggled with it. It's a decision, however, that each of us will have to make on our own. And I think that it's safe to say for Jeremy and yours truly, that decision has been clear for quite some time. We do not see the man, being Trump, as qualified, nor do we believe that he will operate in America's best interest. We cannot, in good conscience, support either of the mainstay political candidates, or many, or any, for that matter, of the third party candidates. Again, this is why we say it's so important to realize that the only litmus test that matters when making these sorts of determinations is the United States Constitution. A candidate must follow the Constitution. And if they don't, then they have not earned our votes. And then in the scenario where none of the candidates follow the Constitution, then you ask yourself which one hurts it the most. And you see, with Trump and Hillary, they both hurt it equally. We literally believe that. That is the only conclusion that we can come to, having observed the facts in an objective fashion, viewing them under a totality of the circumstances. But with Cruz, irrespective of motive, he still supports the Constitution more than, say, John Cornyn. And again, I'm going to re-emphasize this fact that John Cornyn and Mitch the Turtle McConnell were the ones who were actively working to develop a coup here in Texas for the 2018 election. I believe Cruz was attempting to deny them the method by which they could accomplish their twisted goals here. In that sense, I disagree with Erickson, who said that Cruz was doing this for purely personal or political reasons. I think he did this to best protect and serve the constituency that he has in Texas. In fact, he swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And sometimes, yes, folks, that means making, difficult decisions. As a criminal defense attorney, or when I worked in criminal defense, it was difficult. There were times that I knew that my client was guilty, but I still made the state jump through the hoops. And the reason for that is I swore to uphold the Constitution. I swore to make sure that that government, which has so much at their disposal, so much at their fingertips, had to go through the hoops. Otherwise, what is to stop them from infringing upon my rights, your rights, Jeremy's rights, Nelson's rights, any of our rights? We, in our capacity as the people, and I, in my capacity as an officer of the court, am obligated, and we are obligated, to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, and that means making difficult decisions from time to time. And I think that is what we have seen in with regards or in regards to what Cruz had to make here. And I don't believe it was an easy choice for him, because the man slandered his father, attacked his wife, accused him of marital infidelity, which was merely projecting his own shortcomings, his being Donald Trump's shortcomings, onto Cruz.
Again, we see that people are going to say, that Cruz is a traitor. He's doing this. Well, it's like with Mr. Erickson saying that Cruz is doing this for his own, future gain. I don't believe that in the least at all. Period.
Right.
For the simple fact that, again, as you mentioned, Cruz's track record, everything that he's done since he has stepped foot on the political stage in this grand arena, everything that he has done as Texas Solicitor General, arguing in front of the Supreme Court in defense of our rights, in defense of the Constitution, everything he's done as senator for the short time that he has been there, which a lot of people automatically think that because he's a senator, he's a lifelong politician right off the bat. These are the things, instances like that, and that kind of mindset, that is what is eroding away the individual's ability to think for themselves. They're regurgitating and repeating talking points and generalizations and stereotypes that have been mapped out and printed out, written out in crayon for them by the Fabians and those that seek to destroy our country. When people allow themselves to fall subject to that and adopt that kind of mentality, they're no longer thinking for themselves. See, Cruz is not doing this for himself. If he wanted to do something for himself politically, he would have actually taken a different route in running his candidacy for president. He would have taken a different...
Jeremy, let me interject here because it's important. I think that going off of what you're saying there, if he wanted to do this for political points, why didn't he fall on his sword at the same time that Marco Rubio did? Or at the same time that Mike Huckleberry did. You see, that is what a selfish politician would do. Those are our selfish politicians. Those are the sellouts. I don't think Cruz was a sellout because he took the political heat at the time for refusing to endorse Trump at the time. And one of the things that you and I noted going back to that time in July was that he didn't say that you couldn't vote for Trump or that he was not going to vote for Trump. That is a lot of projection. And I think that that is one of the dangers that we have seen unfurl time and again in this 2016 presidential election cycle is that people are pinning their own hopes, their own dreams and aspirations and views for the future onto a candidate. And I think you're going to be let down greatly each and every time that you do that because ultimately they are fallible human beings. Well, and that's the danger of trying to find a messianic figure. You can't have a messianic figure. We, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America, are the only ones charged with the duty, obligation, but above all, responsibility to stand up for, maintain, and safeguard those rights.
And this is why I think that Erickson is flat out wrong on this.
Right, and we respect him. We respect him, but he's wrong on this.
I can't say it any more clearly that with him being wrong, because again, Cruz's background, his actions speak louder than words. Everything he's done, and see, this is the thing about human nature in and of itself. Individuals are always going to revert to their own habits, their initial habits that they've established for themselves, that they've developed, and that they've always adhered to. They will always revert back to that at any given point in time when their backs are against the wall. It's just human nature. It's kind of like a rattlesnake. A rattlesnake is always going to go about its business, stay away from people, but when they're backed into a corner or they're in a position to where they can no longer have the habit, they're going to revert to their natural instinct, and that is self-preservation. Now, I think Cruz is doing this to a certain extent of self-preservation, but that's just a small part. Because with him being able to preserve himself, it allows him to be able to fully accomplish and perform his duties and his oath that he took to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution. It's kind of like a law enforcement officer, or even you, Randy. Right. If you are not capable, or if you're put into a situation to where it comes down to your self-preservation in order to be able to perform your duties, you're going to preserve yourself first. It's like a law enforcement officer. Their first priority is to go home, to make it through their shift, and to go back home to their families. So when they're facing...
Jeremy, it also connects with... Think in mind of how anyone who's been on an airplane has heard the safety video of if there is an emergency in the air and the oxygen masks fall down, secure your mask first before assisting someone else. Why? Self-preservation. It ties directly into what you're saying.
Yeah, if you're not able to be able to function in your capacity to where you're fully functional, how are you going to be able to help other people? How are you going to be able to preserve this? And I think this is what Cruz's decision ultimately came down to. Now, I'm not in the guy's head. The guy's a genius when it comes to stuff, legalese and so on and so forth. He's an absolute genius. Right. But I have to think along the same lines as him. If he's not capable of being able to be in the position to where he can help people, he has to preserve his position first before he can move on and fulfill his duties. That's a tantamount and fundamental principle of anybody who holds office. Especially when you take the oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution. You're not able to do that in your full capacity if you're not there. And I think
Right.
that's what this decision ultimately came down for him.
Right. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing right now, as we sit here and speak into these microphones, is that people are feeling the pang of that upset. And don't get me wrong, I feel it too. Especially when you have been fighting as hard as we have, go back to the primary process. This is a very disheartening feeling. And we never thought that he would do this. We knew that there was the possibility of it, but we didn't think it would come to that. And take, for instance, Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck is feeling very down about this, and I already know that there are going to be all of those people out there attacking him, just as they have been all throughout this 2016 presidential election fiasco. But I understand where Beck's coming from, and I understand where people like our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, are coming from. But I think that we have to take a step back and look at the overarching picture. What is going to be in the best interest of the American people? Not having any influence? Because I think that that is what Cruz was having to face. I think Cruz was forced under duress. I think that's wrong. But given the totality of the circumstances and given the reality of the circumstances as they exist on the ground right now, that was the only decision that was available to him. And believe me, vengeance is a dish best served cold. And I think that Cruz will have his opportunity to have vengeance here. I think Cruz will have his ability to go after people like John Cornyn, who, if you are in Texas, folks, I want you to, the next time he's up for election, get him out, please. We've been trying for so long now. It is time that John Cornyn go meet the pavement, because he is not following his oath of office, either as an attorney, either as a former Supreme Court justice for the state of Texas, and as a senator for the United States of America. You see, it's one of the reasons why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have stressed the importance of holding people accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. I think that John Cornyn, Mitch McConnell, all of these Benedict Arnolds in our rank and file need to be held accountable. And of course, the only ones that have that duty, obligation, but above all responsibility to do that is we the people in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That is what it's going to take. Use your anger that you're feeling, use this upset feeling or frustration that you're feeling for constructive purposes and constructive ends.
I want to say this and put this out there to Glenn Beck and his associates, Stu and Jeffy and the like, and anybody else in that capacity. Don't look at this as a setback. Don't look at this as something that is an end-all to be-all of conservatism or constitutional principles. Again, they wanted a war. They wanted a war within the political confines in this republic. We've warned what will happen if they pushed this, if they wanted this kind of war. I'm not standing down. I'm not backing up on this whatsoever. But I will tell you this, Glenn Beck, I've got your back. Even Mark Levin, I've got your back. Even though you came out in support of Trump and we called you to the carpet on it, which we expect you to do for us as well. If we deviate any way, shape, or form from anything that we're saying, we expect to be held accountable. We expect people to leave comments. We expect people to address us on this. If people are not willing to hold each other accountable or willing to be held accountable, don't look at this as a besmirchment. Don't look at this as an attack. Look at this as called tough love. Because ultimately, we have to stand united on this. Yes, absolutely. Yes, we don't agree with Cruz's decision. However, we understand why he did it. And we're willing to accept that because, again, it is his right to cast that vote. And for us to disparage that would make us complete and utter frauds and liars, because it would go against everything that we've preached about and spoken about here on this show. Every single
Right.
thing. It would make us no different than the
It would
Fabians.
be the perfect. It would be the perfect personification of hypocrisy, and that's the one thing that we do need to try and avoid. And I think what it requires is that we do a bit of soul searching to dig into our heart of hearts and our soul of souls to find out what it is that we stand for and represent. And again, that is why the Constitution is so important, because when you go back to the clear and concise language and the natural law tenets of our Constitution, you begin to see a roadmap put out. That's what our founding fathers meant for it to be. It was a guiding light. It is something that by its very nature is timeless and can continue to push us towards the light of truth. And recall that the truth is so important. Again, going back to Aristotle, the truth is what people naturally ascribe to. It's because it is the natural state of the human condition. And I think that a lot of the problems that we're facing right now is that people just aren't aware of how the human condition works, because we have been taken away from the human condition by all of these trinkets and gadgets and information technology and all of that crap. And while that is a double-edged sword, while we use things like social media to reach out to you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, it can also be that double-edged sword that works against us each and every time. And so we have to focus on that which matters. And the only way to do that is to go back to basics. As you have said so many times, Jeremy, basics. Again, back to the fundamental building blocks of society, that of the family, that of the natural law tenets that underpin both our shared United States Constitution and our Federalist Representative Republican form of government, going back to what it is that defines us both as a nation and as a people. Now, I know that's far easier said than done, but it is what we have to do if we are ever going to successfully place this nation back onto the path to prosperity. That is our duty, obligation, but above all, responsibility. And I know it may sound like we have repeated that ad nauseum here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, but it is that important because it goes to those intrinsic ultimate concerns as opposed to penultimate concerns.
I don't want individuals to sit here and think that, again, we're making excuses for Cruz's decision, that we're throwing in the towel. I'm looking at this again. I've mentioned war strategists, MacArthur, Patton, and even Rommel. And I know people will say, "Well, you're exalting a Nazi war criminal." It doesn't matter in that regard. What matters is the guy was a brilliant strategist. I mention those individuals because I look at this as, again, conceding a little bit of ground in order to gain that much more and then some in the long term. That is what we need to focus on. We've done it ourselves here on the show, Randy. We've offered Trump to come onto the show, and we knew he wouldn't do it, and he still won't do it. But we've put it out there. We've extended the so-called olive branch. We've gave a concession to give him a platform. Why? Because we know if he would have accepted it, we, the people, and our good conscience would have gained that much more ground. See, he didn't even acknowledge it. In fact, I know he heard about it. We both know that he's heard about the acceptance. Hell, we've even reached out to him on Twitter and gotten no response back.
Right.
People say, well, he gets millions of tweets a day. It doesn't matter. When we directly tell him, you are this, this, and this, and we're offering you the opportunity to explain your actions, because this is what is responsible of we the people. It is up to us to vet the candidates. It is up to us to make the decision. They have to gain our trust. So in order to do that, they have to answer questions that are posed to them. Failure to do that is what breeds the distrust and the contempt. And he brought that on himself by ignoring us.
Yes.
And this is the way I look at this. We've made that concession. We've given a little bit of our ground to him to give him a platform. so that we can
Right.
gain more ground in the end run, not for our own personal self-aggrandizement and edification, but so that the American people, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, would have clarification on these things.
Right.
He rebuffed that. He didn't even acknowledge it. That set the tone. And again, they said they want this kind of a war. Well, guess what? This is part of the war, utilizing MacArthur and Patton and Rommel's strategy of conceding a little bit of ground to gain more in the end. Guess what? We're going to gain more ground in the long run than these individuals realize, and which means they're ultimately going to lose.
Right. And you know what this ties into, Jeremy, is that we have to be the ones to attempt to save this nation. I think what so many people have felt here is that Cruz was somehow playing the role of a hero, that messianic figure that they can pin all their hopes to. Jeremy, we've warned people against doing that, irrespective of who they support for the White House. It's a dangerous position in which they can project their own hopes and aspirations onto the candidate, and I think it ends badly each and every time. We stress the importance of the Constitution because it explains how one should react to these sorts of scenarios. We have to recall that it is we, the people, who originally created this government. That's why the preamble opens with the line, "We the people. We were seeking to secure domestic tranquility and to establish a more perfect union, and thereby secure the blessings of liberties, not just for our current generation, but for our posterity." I think this is the aspect that has been lost on so many people. We oftentimes get caught up in the here and now while forgetting that the system of polity for the United States is meant to surpass that in every way, shape, and form imaginable. This is why we must foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Whether Cruz sold out or not, I think in his mind that he thought he was doing what was necessary to preserve this nation and our Constitution for future generations. That doesn't make it easier for us, but it does provide us with a prime example of what must be considered when approaching this election, and indeed any other election in this nation. Recall that our founding fathers did not fully agree. I'm sure you're all aware of the story of Thomas Paine, who penned Common Sense, and the falling out he had with the father of our nation, George Washington. Paine accused Washington of having betrayed the revolution when he refused to support the French Revolution. However, Paine went to France and attempted to aid their revolution until he bore witness to the reign of terror that began in 1792. Robespierre accused Paine of betraying the revolution when he refused to condone the wanton killings that led to him being imprisoned in the Temple prison, that very infamous prison there in Paris. It was an American ambassador to France who finally helped Paine get free because Washington refused to aid him. Either way, our War of Independence could never have reached its successful conclusion without either Paine or Washington.
Yeah, and both individuals, Paine and Washington, made choices and made mistakes, so to speak, and hindsight revealed them to be a mistake. See, and this is the problem. A lot of people think that Cruz voting for Trump is a mistake made by Cruz. Well, we don't know if it's a mistake yet or not because the future has not happened. Only the future will shed light on it. That's why hindsight is always 20/20. I'm not going to say it's a mistake because I don't know. I don't know for certain what Cruz's intentions are in voting for this. We can only speculate. And that's the problem.
There's an important point to be made with that, Jeremy. It's why is it in our court of law that whenever you go by the evidentiary rules or the rules of evidence, that one of the objections is objection calls for speculation? It's because you can't go by speculation. You have to go by the solid, concrete facts of reality. That is very difficult. It's part of the reason why when you look at all of this crap that's going on in Charlotte, all of these race-based protests, that you don't want these things like the Tulsa, Oklahoma shooting to be tried in the court of public opinion. Why? Because the evidentiary standards and rules and guidelines don't apply.
Sure.
The presumption of innocence ties into that. And that's something I think we need to extend into the arena of American polity. When you extend that to the arena of American polity, you don't just tar and feather someone without proof. In fact, the Sons of Liberty didn't go out and tar and feather people without concrete evidence. It's still a type of vigilantism, and it's still something that should be on the table, but as a last resort. Because recall what Sam Adams, the leader of the Sons of Liberty, called upon the American people to be. He demanded that we be a virtuous republic, that we carry that working knowledge and understanding of what it is to be virtuous, to be in good rectitude, to be standing for that which is righteous and just and fair, and that you don't back away from that. I think that's a problem. When we get caught up in the here and now, we lose sight of what it means to stand up to be virtuous, or what it is to be fair, free, open, and honest.
Well, and see, this goes right into the secondary point I was going to bring up with the whole labeling. As again, you mentioned people being under this auspice that Cruz is a messianic figure. Well, that label was cast on him by the Fabians, by Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and everybody else that opposed him. They all created that label and put that on him. And then what happened was they did that in order to breed the complacency, and now they're using it. They're going after individuals like another acquaintance of ours who has said Ted Cruz is dead to him. He doesn't support him in any way, shape, or form. He played right into their hands. This is exactly what they wanted the ultimate result to be. They create the label, and then when the point comes for them to implement and use that propaganda against people, they created the label so that people would look up to Cruz as the only person that would be able to save this nation. It was never about Cruz being the person elected to save this republic. It has never been about any candidate being elected to save this republic. That onus falls squarely on we the people. It always has, and it always will. The Fabians come along and they create these labels, and they create this projection and this conjecture, and people bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and now they're going to use it to say, you're looking at Cruz as a messianic figure. They created all of this. They created the problem, and now they're using the problem to whittle away and destroy any last fabric or thread of what our sovereignty is. That's what we've been warning about this whole duration, over this whole year and 2 weeks of our existence here at the Radio Aviation Excellence Wright Flyer. That's what we have been warning Jeremy, about. And it's come to fruition.
Jeremy, to say that you are going to just have Cruz be dead to you, to say that he's just dead to you, I don't understand that. I don't understand how you can just... He is human. And let's just be human and say that it is that he made a mistake. Okay, so you're going to discard his entire record of doing great things, of being consistent, of being the greatest consistent warrior for the Constitution and our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights over one blemish? Does that make any sense? If you treated your children that way, if you raised your children that way, your children would never be able to accomplish anything. They would never be able to go anywhere because they would be held back for a mistake that they've made. In fact, that's one of the major glaring and growing complaints that I have with the criminal justice system, is that we don't allow people, after they have paid their penance, to come back into society, that we want to continue to punish them perpetually. But that is really a disingenuous position. It's a dangerous position. It's a position that ensures that the society will never be able to progress. And, you know, while the progressives try and take over that term of progress, no, really, It's not that all change is bad, but it has to be change within reason. That is what the Constitution is there for. It is to be the supreme law of the land. It is to guide us into logical and reasonable progress without throwing away our fundamental and bedrock principles and tenets that have propelled us to such lofty heights in our relatively brief yet illustrious history.
Randy, I'm going to take this a step further. You kind of opened the door a little bit, but I'm about to kick it off its hinges with what you said. Regarding children being held back and being put into this mold of always expecting somebody to do this for them and to always, be on the right side of things, never being allowed to make a mistake, never being held accountable for it.
Right.
That is all part of learning. If we are not allowed to make mistakes, mistakes are fine to be made. People can make mistakes. It's all part of the learning process. We as individuals, and I've always said this, and I will always say this, I've encountered people that said, well, I've learned everything in life I need to know. And my response to them is, so you're a zombie. And I said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, the only time you stop learning is when you're dead. Obviously, if you've learned everything you need to know, you most assuredly have died, and now you're coming back and you're a mindless individual. Because if you stop learning, i.e. stop making mistakes, and I'm going to say this right now, to even cast the idea that this is a mistake on Cruz's part, again, remember what I said just a few minutes ago. It's speculation that is a mistake. We do not know if it is a mistake yet or not because it is not fully played out yet. We do not have all of the facts of the scenario surrounding it. We have nothing to go off of. And this is, again, public opinion, thinking that it is the set in stone commandments of how people should operate. Ted Cruz, if it comes to fruition that this was a mistake for him to vote for Trump, then guess what? As I said, Cruz will be the one who has to answer for that. Absolutely. And at that point in time, we the people must hold him accountable for that. And you know what? Here's the thing. Ted Cruz has what's known as honor and integrity. He will have no problem accepting the responsibility for his actions. He never has. And he does not strike me as an individual that will pass the buck off to somebody else and make excuses for it. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, we cannot tell people, this is a mistake, you shouldn't do this, blah, blah, blah. Let people live their lives. Let them live their lives, because if you want to interject into people's lives and try to dictate to them how they should live them, you are damaging them. You are creating such a catastrophe for them to where, if you persuade them to not make mistakes they should make decisions that they should make because that is how they learn, then ultimately, Randy, that comes back down to the point of complacency. And that is one of the ugliest, most damaging emotions and scenarios anybody could ever be put in. It is lumped in right in there with moral relativism, political correctness, and everything else that we've declared war on.
Right.
Let people make mistakes. Let them live their lives.
Right.
We are
and
not.
In fact, what you're saying there, Jeremy, what you're saying there is, tying this back to Thomas Paine, is that we must ensure that we do not fall into the trap that Paine did because of raw emotionalism. How many times have we sat here speaking into these microphones, warning about the danger of raw emotionalism and how that leaves you highly susceptible to the carnival barkers, to the con artists, to the snake oil salesmen that are going to do everything in their power to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes of redefining us fundamentally, irreparably, permanently. That is what we're getting at here. It has to come down to that. And we must be true to who we are and what this nation stands for. And that's the guarantee we make to you here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. We will not back away from that. We will always be the voice of liberty, because that is what we have guaranteed to do. And if we ever stray from it, yes, we hope that you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, will draw us back into the fold to correct us for wherever we have gone astray. And that is what we must be dedicated to, both as a nation and as a people, because being a free people requires there to be self-accountability, self-responsibility, and those two things working in tandem to create self-determination. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, she will not betray the alcohol. She'll just pour it for you. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I've been joined on our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them in the chat function here, or after it's done processing, you can leave comments either here at our YouTube page, our Google Plus page, or our Facebook page. And on top of that, we invite you to follow us at our Twitter account with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, that of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, our Blogspot account that has our audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program, as well as being chock full of other useful information and posts. And then there is the Cafe Press account. Jeremy, why don't you tell them just a little bit about the Cafe Press account?
Well, folks, the Cafe Press account, it offers a whole slew of novelties, gift ideas, to where you can show support for us, but most importantly, show your support to individuals so that they know that you support yourself, your ability to think freely, and offer up encouragement and enlightenment to them to do the same.
And you can do that through clothing, hats, apparel, shot glasses, drink glasses, clocks, watches, neckties, and whatever else. As always, folks, we want to thank you for tuning in to The Wright Flyer. We will see you again next time. Do take care. We will see you again. Goodbye, folks.